The shuttle descended through clouds of violet gas, and Daniel Carter pressed his face against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. But what he felt was not wonder. It was dread that crept up his spine and settled in his chest like a stone. The throne world of the Valkorian Empire stretched below him, a planet of black mountains and golden cities that gleamed under 3 pale suns. And somewhere down there, the king waited to decide whether humanity would have peace or war. Daniel was not a soldier, and he was not a hero. And he knew exactly why Earth Command had chosen him for this mission. He was expendable. A mid-level diplomat with no family connections and no political value. The kind of man they could sacrifice without losing sleep. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform made of polished obsidian, and the hatch opened with a hiss that sounded like a serpent, warning him to turn back. But Daniel straightened his shoulders and stepped into the alien air. It smelled like copper and something sweeter. Something that reminded him of flowers rotting in summer heat. 6 Valkorian guards waited for him, their scaled bodies towering at least 8 feet tall, their eyes yellow and slitted like the predators they had evolved from. And they carried weapons that hummed with energy. Daniel did not understand. Human ambassador. One of them spoke through a translator device mounted on its chest. The words flat and mechanical. The king grants you passage to the throne, but you will show respect or you will show nothing ever again. Daniel nodded and followed them through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small, with ceilings that rose 50 feet overhead and walls covered in murals depicting Valkorian conquests across a dozen star systems. Saw images of cities burning and species kneeling and gold flowing into vaults the size of mountains. And he understood the message. This empire had crushed worlds before humanity ever left Earth. And it would crush many more after humanity was forgotten. But then they passed through a gallery that made Daniel stop walking. And one of the guards growled at him to keep moving. But he could not tear his eyes away from what he saw. Glass cells lined both walls, dozens of them stretching into the distance, and inside each cell stood a living being from a conquered world, frozen in place by some technology that kept them alive, but unable to move. They were trophies, Daniel realized with horror, living displays of the king's power over flesh and freedom. There were creatures with 4 arms and creatures with no arms at all. Beings of light trapped in containers of shadow and beings of shadow trapped in containers of light. And all of them had the same expression in their eyes, a despair so deep it had become their entire existence. And then Daniel saw Hirsch. She stood in a cell near the middle of the gallery. A young woman with brown hair that had grown past her shoulders and skin that had turned pale from years without real sunlight. And she wore the torn remains of a jumpsuit that bore the emblem of the Earth Colonial Authority. Her eyes met his through the glass. And for one terrible moment, Daniel saw hope flicker in them before it died, replaced by the same emptiness he had seen in all the others. He knew that emblem, and he knew what it meant. 3 years ago, the colony ship Starlight Wanderer had vanished on its way to establish humanity's first settlement beyond the border territories. And Earth had searched for months before declaring all 200 colonists lost, but here was proof that at least one of them had survived. Trapped in a glass cage on an alien world, displayed like an exotic animal in a zoo that catered to monsters. Move, the guard commanded. And this time it shoved Daniel forward with enough force to make him stumble. He walked, but he turned his head to keep the woman in sight for as long as possible. And he saw her lips move in words he could not hear through the glass. She was saying something, repeating it over and over. And Daniel thought it might be a name, or a prayer, or simply the word please, spoken to a universe that had stopped listening years ago. The throne room doors opened before him. Massive slabs of gold and black iron that groaned like wounded animals as they swung inward. And Daniel stepped into a chamber so vast it could have held a small city king. Zorath sat upon a throne carved from a single piece of crystal that pulsed with inner light. His body even larger than his guards, his scales a deep purple that shifted to black where shadows touched them. And his crown was made from the bones of enemies he had killed with his own claws. Human, the king's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. You stand before the ruler of 12 star systems and 400 billion souls. And you come to beg for mercy on behalf of your pitiful species. Daniel forced himself to bow. Not deep enough to show submission, but enough to show he understood the game they were playing. Great King Zorath, he said. And his voice sounded small in that enormous space. I come to discuss terms that might benefit both our peoples, and end the conflict that has cost lives on both sides. The king laughed, and the sound was like rocks grinding together in the deep places of the earth. Benefit both peoples, Zorath repeated, his yellow eyes gleaming with amusement. You humans killed 3,000 of my warriors in your border territories, and you speak of mutual benefit as if you have something I could possibly want. Daniel kept his expression neutral, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. We defended ourselves, he said, and we would rather build than burn, but we will do whatever we must to protect our own. The king leaned forward on his throne, and his claws scraped against the crystal armrests with a sound that made Daniel's teeth ache. Tomorrow we will discuss what you can offer me, Zorath said. But tonight you will rest in quarters I have prepared, and you will think very carefully about how much your species values its continued existence. Daniel bowed again and turned to leave. But his mind was not on tomorrow's negotiation. It was on the woman in the glass cell, the survivor of a ship that humanity had mourned and forgotten. The proof that the Valkorians had been hunting humans long before the border skirmish ever began. He would not forget her face. And he would not forget the way hope had died in her eyes when she realized he was just another prisoner walking past her. Caged, but Daniel Carter was not a prisoner yet. And somewhere in the depths of his expendable soul, something was beginning to burn. Daniel did not sleep that night, and when the suns rose over the Black Mountains, he walked into the throne room with shadows under his eyes and fire in his heart. King Zorath was already waiting, surrounded by advisors and generals who looked at Daniel the way a cat looks at a mouse that has wandered too far from its hole. Human ambassador, the king announced, spreading his arms wide to display the rings of gold and gemstone that covered his clawed fingers. I have decided to be generous today, more generous than your species deserves. Daniel stood alone in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of 100 alien eyes upon him, and he waited for the offer he knew was coming. 10,000 bars of pure Valkorian gold, Zorath declared. Enough wealth to fund your pathetic colonies for a century. And that is only the beginning. The king gestured, and holographic images appeared in the air between them, 3 moons orbiting a gas giant, their surfaces glittering with mineral deposits. Mining rights to these worlds, Zorath continued. Resources your species has never dreamed of possessing. Metals and crystals that will advance your technology by generations. Daniel remained silent, and the king seemed pleased by what he mistook for awe. And finally, Zorath said, a treaty of non-aggression lasting 100 years, during which the Valkorian Empire will not expand into human territory, and your colonies will be safe from our fleets. The generals murmured their approval, and Daniel could see the logic of the offer by galactic standards. This was more than fair. This was extraordinarily generous. This was the kind of deal that would make Earth Command celebrate for years in exchange, the king said. And now his voice dropped to something colder. Humanity will acknowledge Valkorian superiority in all official communications, and you will pay an annual tribute of 100 human volunteers who will serve in my household. Daniel felt the trap close around him, felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like chains. 100 humans every year. sent to this world to become servants or trophies or something worse. And all of it wrapped in the pretty paper of peace and prosperity. The tribute is symbolic. Zorath added with a smile that showed rows of teeth like broken glass. A gesture of respect from a younger species to an elder one. Nothing more. Daniel looked at the holographic moons floating in the air. Looked at the gold that gleamed on every surface of the throne room. Looked at the king who believed he was offering mercy when he was really offering slavery with extra steps. "I have a question," Daniel said. And his voice was steady, even though his hands wanted to shake. "About the prisoners in your gallery." Zorath's smile flickered with confusion, and his advisors exchanged glances that suggested this was not how negotiations usually proceeded. "The gallery is not part of this discussion," the king said. "There is a human woman in one of those cells." Daniel continued, ignoring the warning growl from the nearest general. "And I would like to know how she came to be there." Silence fell over the throne room, thick and heavy as a funeral shroud. "You speak of Lisa Morgan," Zorath said finally, and his tone had shifted from regal to curious. "A colonist from a ship that wandered into our territory 3 years ago. The Starlight Wanderer," Daniel said. "Yes," the king confirmed. "We intercepted the vessel and claimed its passengers as compensation for violating our borders. Though most of them proved too fragile to survive captivity." Daniel's jaw tightened. But he kept his voice calm, and Lisa Morgan survived. "She did," Zorath said. "She has spirit, that one. More spirit than I expected from your soft species. And so I kept her as a curiosity to remind myself that even humans can sometimes surprise us." The king laughed. And his court laughed with him, and Daniel felt something inside him grow very cold and very quiet. "Is she part of this negotiation?" he asked. The laughter stopped, and Zorath tilted his massive head to study Daniel with new interest. "Everything has a price," the king said slowly. "But why would you sacrifice gold and moons for one worthless human female when you could have an empire's friendship instead?" Daniel took a deep breath and made the choice that would change everything. "I reject your offer," he said. And the words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "I do not want your gold, and I do not want your moons. And I do not want a peace built on the bones of my people." Zorath rose from his throne, and he was even more terrifying standing up, a mountain of scale and muscle and ancient fury. "You dare refuse me?" he thundered. "I do not refuse you," Daniel said. "I am simply telling you what I actually want." He pointed toward the gallery, toward the glass cells, toward the woman who had survived 3 years of hell and still had enough spirit to make an alien king remember her name. "I want Lisa Morgan," Daniel said. "Free her, and we can talk about everything else." The king stared at him, and for a moment Daniel saw something flicker in those yellow eyes. Not anger, not even surprise, but something closer to fascination. "You would trade an empire's friendship for one prisoner?" Zorath asked. "She is not a prisoner," Daniel said. "She is a citizen of Earth. And humanity does not abandon its people. You are either very brave or very stupid," the king said. "I have been told it is hard to tell the difference." Daniel Replegereth sat back down on his throne. And when he spoke again, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I will give you 1 day to reconsider your foolishness. And if you still refuse my generous offer when the suns rise tomorrow, you will die as a spy, and your species will burn." Guards seized Daniel's arms and dragged him from the throne room, but he did not struggle. And he did not look away from the king until the golden doors slammed shut between them. They threw him into a cell in the gallery, and when he looked through the glass wall to his left, he saw Lisa Morgan staring back at him with tears running down her face. "You stupid man," she whispered through the barrier. "Why did you do that for me?" Daniel pressed his palm against the glass and smiled. "Because someone had to," he said. and I was the one who was here. The night cycle came slowly to the throne world, and the three suns sank below the mountains like dying embers. While artificial lights flickered to life throughout the palace, Daniel sat with his back against the glass wall of his cell, listening to the sounds of the gallery settling into darkness, the hum of stasis fields, the distant footsteps of guards, and the quiet breathing of prisoners who had learned to sleep standing up. "Tell me about Earth," Lisa said from her cell, and her voice was soft, like she was afraid speaking too loudly would shatter something fragile. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to remember what home felt like. "The last time I saw my daughter," he said, "she was standing in the kitchen making pancakes and complaining that I never taught her how to flip them properly." He smiled at the memory even though it hurt. She burned 3 of them before she got it right, and then she was so proud of herself that she made me take a picture to prove it happened. Lisa laughed quietly. "How old is she?" 16. Daniel said, "Old enough to think she knows everything and young enough to still need her father, even if she would never admit it." "Does she know where you are?" Daniel opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of his cage. "She knows I went somewhere important," he said, "but I did not tell her the details because I did not want her to worry." Lisa was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I was supposed to be a teacher," she said. "On the colony, I was going to start a school for the children of the first settlers." "What would you have taught them?" "Everything," Lisa said. "History and science and mathematics and all the stories that make us human." She pressed her hand against the glass between them. "I wanted to give them roots," she continued, "something to hold on to when they looked up at an alien sky and felt lost." Daniel understood that feeling better than she knew. "You still can," he said. "When we get out of here, you can still build that school." "You keep saying when," Lisa replied, as if tomorrow is something we will actually see. Before Daniel could respond, a new sound echoed through the gallery. Not footsteps or machinery, but voices whispering in the darkness like leaves rustling in a wind that should not exist. "Human," a voice called from somewhere to his left, and Daniel turned to see a creature with 6 eyes and skin like cracked leather pressing against the glass of its cell. "We have heard stories about your kind," another voice joined in, this one from across the gallery. "Stories of humans who fight until their bodies break," it said, "and then fight some more with nothing but their spirits." More voices rose, dozens of them, filling the darkness with languages Daniel had never heard but somehow understood. "Is it true?" The first creature asked, "Is it true that humans fear nothing, not even death itself?" Daniel stood up and pressed his palm against the glass. "It is true that we fear many things," he said honestly. "We fear losing the people we love, and we fear failing when it matters most." He paused and looked around at all the eyes watching him from their prisons. "But we learned long ago that fear is not the same as surrender," he continued. "And we would rather die standing than live on our knees." The whispers grew louder, passing from cell to cell like fire, spreading through dry grass. 3 cycles ago, one of the prisoners said, a human woman was brought here from a mining colony, where she had organized a rebellion. Daniel felt Lisa stiffen beside him. "What happened to her?" Lisa asked. "She refused to stand in her cell like a trophy," the creature replied, "and when the guards came to force her, she fought them with her bare hands." Silence fell over the gallery. "They killed her eventually," the voice continued, "but not before she took 2 of them with her, and the king himself came to watch her die." Daniel bowed his head. "What was her name?" "We do not know," another prisoner said, "but she kept repeating something in your language, something that sounded like a promise." "What did she say?" "She said that more would come," the creature answered. "That humans would never stop coming until every prison in the galaxy stood empty." Lisa was crying again, and Daniel wished more than anything that he could hold her. "She was right," he said. and his voice carried through the gallery like a bell ringing in the darkness. Humanity remembers every name we have lost, and we carry every debt until it is paid. He turned in a slow circle, meeting as many eyes as he could in the dim light. I cannot promise that I will survive tomorrow, he said, but I can promise that Earth will know about this place, and I can promise that my people will not rest until every one of you is free. The prisoners were silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before, not the silence of despair, but the silence of people daring to hope for the first time in years. And then a new sound broke through the quiet, a sound that made Daniel's heart leap, and the guards. Throughout the palace, shout and alarm, it was the roar of engines. Not Valkyrian engines with their smooth hum, but human engines with their rough growl. And it was coming from somewhere above the atmosphere. Liza pressed her face against the glass of her cell and looked up even though there was nothing to see. Through the ceiling. What is that? She whispered. Daniel smiled. And this time, it was a smile that showed his teeth. That is the sound of my people coming to remind this galaxy why we stopped fearing death centuries ago. Alarms began to wail throughout the palace, and guards rushed past the gallery with weapons drawn. And somewhere in the distance, King Zorath was screaming orders that nobody seemed able to follow. The night had ended early on the throne world, and dawn was arriving in the form of 3 human battleships that had no business being anywhere near this system, but humans had never been very good at staying where they were supposed to be, and tonight was no exception. The cell was cold, and the glass walls hummed with energy that made Daniel's skin tingle. But he barely noticed because all his attention was focused on the woman in the cage. Beside him, Lisa Morgan looked older than her 24 years. With lines around her eyes that spoke of pain and loss and sleepless nights spent wondering if anyone would ever come for her. They will kill you tomorrow, she said through the glass. And then they will kill me for giving you a reason to refuse their offer. Daniel shook his head slowly. I recorded everything before they arrested me, he said. Every word of the negotiation, every detail about this gallery. And I transmitted it to Earth before the guards took my equipment. Lisa's eyes widened with something that might have been hope or might have been fear. You sent proof that I am alive? I sent proof that the Valkyrians have been taking humans for years, Daniel said. And I sent proof that their king values slaves more than peace. She pressed her palm against the glass where his hand rested on the other side. And even though they could not touch, the gesture meant more than words could express. My family thinks I am dead, Lisa whispered. My mother stopped sending search parties after the first year, and my little brother graduated from high school without me. They will know the truth soon, Daniel said. Whether we survive or not, they will know what happened to the Starlight Wanderer. Lisa laughed, and it was a broken sound that echoed off the glass walls of their cages. I used to dream about rescue, she said, every night for the first 6 months. I dreamed that ships would come and Marines would break down these walls and carry me home. She looked down at her bare feet on the cold floor. Then I stopped dreaming, she continued, because hope was harder to bear than despair. And I learned that surviving means forgetting what you lost. Daniel wanted to reach through the barrier and hold her, wanted to tell her that everything would be fine. But he was not in the business of comfortable lies. What was it like? He asked instead, on the ship, when they came for you. Lisa closed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was distant like she was reading from a book about someone else's life. We were 3 weeks out from the colony site when the engines failed, she said. And Captain Harrison tried to send a distress signal, but something was blocking our communications. She opened her eyes and stared at nothing. The Valkyrian ships appeared an hour later, 4 of them surrounding us like wolves around a wounded deer. And we knew then that the engine failure was not an accident. Daniel felt his stomach turn with anger and grief. They disabled you deliberately. They had been hunting human ships for months, Lisa said, testing our defenses, learning our weaknesses, taking prisoners to study and enslaved before anyone on Earth even knew we were at war. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were hard as diamond. 200 people were on that ship, she said. Families and scientists and children who just wanted to build something new on a distant world. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. They separated us when we arrived here, sent most of the passengers to mining colonies or breeding facilities, and kept a few of us as personal trophies for the king. How many survived? Daniel asked. I do not know, Lisa admitted. I have not seen another human face in 3 years until you walked through that gallery. She laughed again, and this time it sounded more like a sob. I thought you were a hallucination at first, she said. Another trick my mind was playing to make the loneliness bearable. Daniel pressed both hands against the glass. I am real, he said, and I am going to get you out of here. How? Lisa demanded. You are locked in a cage just like me, and tomorrow the king will execute us both for insulting his pride. Earth received my transmission, Daniel said, and Earth does not forget its children. Lisa shook her head. Even if they wanted to come. The nearest human fleet is weeks away, and the Valkyrians have 1,000 ships guarding this system. Daniel smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. The Valkyrians think they know how fast humanity can respond to threats, he said, but they base their calculations on official fleet positions and standard response times. Lisa stared at him with confusion. What do you mean? I mean that Earth learned a long time ago to keep secrets from species that like to count our ships, Daniel said. And I mean that someone in my government suspected this mission might go badly. He leaned closer to the glass. There are ships closer than anyone knows, he whispered. Ships that do not appear on any official registry. Ships crewed by people who volunteered for missions where survival was not guaranteed. Lisa's eyes widened. You knew this might happen. I suspected, Daniel admitted. Which is why I volunteered for a mission that everyone else called suicide. But why? Lisa asked. Why would you risk everything for strangers you have never met? Daniel thought about his daughter back on Earth. Thought about the birthday party he had missed to take this assignment. Thought about the letter he had written her that said, goodbye in every way except the actual words. Because I have a little girl who looks at the stars every night and believes that humanity is worth believing in, he said. And I could not let her grow up in a universe where we abandon our own people for gold. Lisa was crying now, tears streaming down her face, and she did not try to hide them. You are either the bravest man I have ever met, she said, or the most foolish. My ex-wife would say foolish, Daniel replied. But she always did underestimate me. A sound echoed through the gallery. Soft at first, but growing louder whispers passing from cell to cell as the other prisoners stirred from their frozen states. What is happening? Lisa asked. Daniel listened to the whispers, heard words in languages he did not understand mixing with emotions. He understood perfectly hope and fear and desperate longing. They are watching us, he said. And they are remembering what it feels like to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. The whispers grew into a chorus, and Daniel made a promise to the darkness that surrounded them. If I survive this, he said loud enough for all of them to hear, I will tell the galaxy about every single one of you. And humanity will not rest until every cage in this gallery stands empty. The prisoners fell silent. But it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence of people holding their breath and waiting for a miracle they had stopped believing in long ago. And somewhere in the darkness above the throne world, something was moving through the void between stars. Something that carried the fire of Earth and the fury of a species that had never learned how to abandon its children. The throne room shook with the force of weapons fire in orbit, and King Zorth stood before his generals with fury burning in his yellow eyes. How did they get here so quickly? He demanded, slamming his clawed fist against his throne hard enough to crack the crystal. Your intelligence told me the nearest human fleet was 3 weeks away. The generals looked at each other with fear on their scaled faces, and none of them wanted to be the one to answer. We do not know. Great King, one of them finally admitted. They appeared from nowhere, as if they had been waiting just beyond our sensor range. Zorath turned to the window that overlooked his capital city, where flashes of light in the sky showed that his defensive fleet was already engaged with the human ships. 3 vessels. He growled. They sent only 3 vessels against the might of the Valkorian Empire. 3 vessels crewed by humans who do not fear death. One of his advisors said quietly, and captained by someone who does not follow normal rules of engagement. A communication screen flickered to life on the wall, and the face that appeared made Zorath hiss with hatred. Admiral Kevin Brooks was a human in his 50s with gray hair cut short and eyes that looked like they had seen too many battles to be surprised by anything. King Zorath, the admiral said, and his voice was calm, as if he was discussing the weather instead of interplanetary war. You have 1 hour to release Ambassador Daniel Carter and all human prisoners in your custody. You threaten me? Zorath roared. You come to my throne world with 3 ships, and you dare to threaten the ruler of 12 star systems. Admiral Brooks smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. I am not threatening you, he said. I am informing you of what will happen if you do not comply. He leaned forward, and his eyes seemed to look directly at Zorath through the screen. In 1 hour, my ships will begin bombarding your palace, the admiral continued. And they will not stop until every stone is ash and every throne is rubble. You would destroy yourselves in the process. Zorath said, Your 3 ships cannot survive against my entire fleet. You are correct, Admiral Brooks replied. But we will take your palace with us, and we will take your generals, and we will take your legacy. He shrugged as if discussing something trivial. Humanity learned long ago that there are some things worth dying for, he said. And we have never learned how to let our people rot in alien prisons while we count the cost of rescue. The screen went dark, and Zorath stood in silence while his generals waited for orders. Bring me the human ambassador, the king finally said. And bring me the woman he refused gold for. Guards rushed to obey, and minutes later Daniel and Lisa were dragged into the throne room with their hands bound and their faces showing no fear. Zorath descended from his throne and walked toward them until he was close enough for Daniel to smell the copper scent of his breath. Your people have come for you, the king said. 3 ships against 1,000, and they think they can force me to release my property. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. They are not here to force you, he said. They are here to give you a choice between survival and pride. And if I choose pride? Zorath asked. Then we all die together, Daniel replied. And the galaxy learns that the Valkorian Empire was brought low by a species they thought was too young to matter. The king studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, exactly, but something that might have been respect. You would truly die for this woman, he asked. This one insignificant human female who means nothing in the grand design of empires? Daniel looked at Lisa, saw the strength that had kept her alive for 3 years in this nightmare, and knew his answer without having to think. She is not insignificant, he said. And she never was. He turned back to Zorath. Every human life matters to us, he continued. Every single one, from the greatest leader to the smallest child. And we will burn the galaxy to ash before we learn to think otherwise. The king was silent. And above the palace, the battle continued to rage. Your ships are dying, Zorath said finally. My fleet is pushing them back toward the edge of the system. They know, Daniel said. And they are not retreating. Why? The king demanded, genuine confusion in his voice. Why would they sacrifice themselves for 2 people they have never met? Daniel smiled. And it was the smile of someone who understood something the king never could. "Because that is who we are," he said. "And we would rather be extinct than be the kind of species that learns to abandon its own." A general approached the throne and whispered something in the king's ear. And Zorath's expression changed from confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "Your admiral has transmitted a message to every colony in this sector," the general reported, "telling them about the prisoners in our gallery and promising that humanity will return for all of them." Daniel felt satisfaction bloom in his chest. "That message cannot be unsent," he said, "and that promise cannot be broken." King Zorath stared at him for a long moment. And then something extraordinary happened. The alien king laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and grudging admiration. "You have beaten me," Zorath admitted. "Not with weapons or gold, but with something I do not have a word for in my language." He waved his clawed hand, and the guards released Daniel and Lisa from their bonds. "Take them," the king said to his generals. "Take them both to a shuttle and let them return to their ships," Lisa gasped. And Daniel felt his knees go weak with relief. "Why?" he asked. Idrith turned away and walked back toward his throne. "Because you have shown me something today," the king said. "Something that makes me wonder if perhaps my empire has been measuring value in the wrong currency." He sat down on his cracked throne and looked at them with ancient eyes. "Go home. Human," he said. "Tell your people that the Valkorian Empire will release all prisoners taken from your colony ship. And tell them that we will not hunt human vessels again." Daniel bowed, deeper this time than he had before. "And the other prisoners?" he asked. "The ones who are not human?" Zorath's eyes narrowed. "Do not push your luck." "Ambassador," Daniel held his gaze. "I made them a promise," he said. "And I meant every word." The king was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was tired. "Come back in 1 year," Zorath said. "Come back, and we will discuss the others. But today you have won enough." It was not everything Daniel had hoped for, but it was more than he had dared to expect. Guards escorted them through the palace and into a shuttle that rose through the atmosphere toward the waiting human ships. And Lisa pressed her face against the viewport as the throne world fell away beneath them. "I cannot believe it," she whispered. "I cannot believe I am actually leaving." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself lean against another human being. "Believe it," he said. "You are going home." The shuttle docked with Admiral Brooks' flagship, and medics rushed to check Lisa while the Admiral himself came to shake Daniel's hand. "You did good work down there," Brooks said. "Better than anyone expected from a diplomat they sent to die." Daniel smiled wearily. "I had help." 6 months later, Daniel stood in a conference room on Earth while holographic images of freed prisoners floated around him, and representatives from a dozen species listened to his testimony about the Valkorian Gallery. The liberation efforts had already begun. Quiet negotiations and not-so-quiet rescues. And the galaxy was learning that humanity kept its promises. Lisa Morgan sat in the front row of the audience, and beside her sat her mother and her little brother, who had grown so much in 3 years that she barely recognized him. She caught Daniel's eye and smiled. And in that smile was everything gratitude and hope and the knowledge that she was finally, truly free. Daniel finished his testimony and walked down from the podium, and his daughter was waiting for him with tears in her eyes and a plate of slightly burned pancakes in her hands. "Welcome home, Dad," she said. Daniel held her tight and knew that every risk had been worth it. Every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it, because this was what humanity fought for, not gold or power or territory, but the simple, sacred right to bring their children home, and somewhere in the stars, an alien king sat on a cracked throne and wondered what it would be like to have a species that loved each other the way humans did. The galaxy was watching now, And it was learning that some treasures could not be measured in gold. They could only be measured in the hearts of those willing to die for them.